Amelia Earhart, The Vanishing over the Pacific. How does a legend simply disappear into thin air, or more accurately vanish over the vastness of the Pacific Ocean without a trace? Imagine a woman soaring above the endless blue expanse, her dreams as boundless as the skies she conquered, and then, in an instant, swallowed by a merciless, invisible abyss. What really happened to Amelia Earhart? Welcome to Silent Disappear, where we delve into the vanished stories. Stories wrapped in mystery, shrouded in silence, and echoing with unanswered questions that haunt the edges of history. Tonight, we unravel the enigmatic fate of a pioneering trailblazer whose disappearance remains one of the most baffling maritime mysteries of the 20th century. The story of Amelia Earhart is not just the tale of a missing pilot, but of hope, ambition, danger, and the relentless power of the unknown. It is the summer of 1937. The world is a patchwork of uncertainty and innovation, shadowed by political unrest and the lingering aftermath of the Great Depression. Yet in the skies above the Pacific Ocean, a shimmering beacon of courage dares to chart new frontiers. Amelia Earhart, already a formidable icon of aviation and the embodiment of fearless determination, embarks on her most audacious journey, yet circumnavigating the globe in a single-engine Lockheed Electra. The Pacific stretches below like an immense unending mirror, reflecting the sky, a realm inhospitable and unforgiving. The vast ocean, spanning thousands of miles across, is a spectral void where time and coordinates lose meaning beneath the relentless waves. Her planned route threads through tiny island airstrips and perilous open water legs, each a test of resolve and skill. Yet, as Earhart's flight nears the final daunting stretch between Papua New Guinea and Howland Island, a remote speck in the middle of the Pacific radio transmissions fall dark. Navigational aids fail. The Electra vanishes into the void, swallowed by the ocean's embrace, or lost to some unknown fate. Despite dozens of search missions, no wreckage, no definitive clues emerged to explain what became of Amelia and her navigator, Fred Noonan. In this chilling silence, history is left with haunting echoes, fragments of radio static, desperate calls, cryptic log entries, and a riddle wrapped in blue-green water and endless sky. Was it a tragic accident, a forced ditching, a secret island refuge, or a tale of survival, whispered only by the ocean currents? Tonight, we venture into that silence. We sift through the storm of speculation and scattered evidence, exposing the mystery that time itself could not erase. Join us as we lift the veil on one of history's most mystifying disappearances, a story where ambition met an abyss and legend was born from the silent waves. This is the disappearance of Amelia Earhart, the eternal question that still lingers above the vast, empty Pacific. Where did she go? And why does her story continue to vanish within the pulse of the ocean's dark heart? Amelia Earhart. The name alone conjures images of clouds split by propellers, hope soaring on the wind, and eyes shielded from the sun by a leather-capped pioneer peering into the horizon. For much of the world in the 1930s, she was not only a symbol of flight, but of possibility itself. Born in Atchison, Kansas on July 24, 1897, Amelia Mary Earhart had always been a restless soul, a girl caught between Victorian expectations and the storm of change that marked the turn of the century. Her early years played out against the rich farmlands of the Midwest. Her parents, Amy and Edwin, were well respected in their community, but turbulence at home, her father's drinking stretches of financial uncertainty, would instill in Amelia both independence and resilience. As a child, she was never satisfied with the genteel pursuits reserved for girls. Instead, she longed for adventure, climbing trees, hunting rats with a rifle, collecting insects, and making up games with her younger sister Muriel. The world around little Amelia was in flux, bridged between horse-drawn carts and the roaring engines heralding a new age. By her late teens and early 20s, Amelia had dropped in and out of colleges and nursed soldiers during the Spanish influenza pandemic. But it was a single flight in December 1920, when pilot Frank Hawks took her up for 10 minutes in Long Beach, California, that unshackled her destiny. As soon as we left the ground, she would later say, "I knew I myself had to fly." The sky became her sanctuary. Lessons followed, saving money from odd jobs, working as a truck driver, even a photographer, just to afford lessons with Netta Snook, one of the few female aviators willing to instruct another woman. Amelia scraped, scrounged, and finally purchased her own second-hand Kinner Airster, painted it bright yellow, and named it the Canary. By 1922, she'd set her first altitude record for women, 14,000 feet, proving to the world she belonged in the cockpit. By the mid-1930s, Amelia was not only an accomplished pilot, but a global celebrity. She was the first woman to cross the Atlantic solo, the first to fly solo from Hawaii to California, and a best-selling author. Photographs of Earhart with her tousled, wind-blown hair and confident smile filled magazines. But beyond the flashbulbs, she remained unpretentious. Her daily routine was humble, her apartment modest, her wardrobe simple. In public, she wore a tweed jacket, jodhpurs, and a crooked scarf. Friends described her as warm, dry-witted, and quietly intense, with an iron resolve beneath her gentle exterior. Her marriage to publisher George P. Putnam was founded more on partnership than the conventions of the time. She referred to him as GP and preferred Amelia Earhart as her professional moniker. Both partners delighted in each other's ambition, GP orchestrating much of the public stage on which Amelia shone. By 1937, the world had fallen for her. She was an icon of modern womanhood, fiercely independent, yet compassionate, driven but deeply empathetic, never losing sight of those hoping to follow in her footsteps. And yet, even as she prepared for the grandest challenge of her career, to circumnavigate the globe along the equator, there was a gravity to her. Some say she'd grown tired, plagued by headaches and shadows beneath her eyes. Others whispered that the sky was claiming her bit by bit, the high-altitude loneliness hollowing out something inside. But Amelia pressed on. Her days before the final flight were spent in feverish preparation, examining charts, practicing Morse code, with radio operator Fred Noonan overseeing mechanical checks on her custom Lockheed Electra 10E. The South Pacific route was ambitious. Never before had a flyer attempted to cross the Earth at its widest point. The pressure was immense, not just from the press or her sponsors, but from the multitudes who saw in her their own aspirations. During these days in Miami, then Natal, Darwin, and finally Lae in Papua New Guinea, Amelia clung to ritual writing letters to GP, visiting with local dignitaries, keeping a careful diary, but mostly focusing on the mission that was meant to secure her place in history. As the sun rose on July 2, 1937, life hummed with purpose and anticipation. The world, it seemed, sat on the edge of its seat, waiting for Amelia to soar once more. Little did anyone know it was the last time the world would see her. It was the pre-dawn hours of July 2, 1937, in Lae, New Guinea. Rain lashed at the runway, the sky a bruised tapestry of violet and gray. In the hangar, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan moved with quietly practiced urgency. The Lockheed Electra gleamed under the flickering lights. Engineers checked and rechecked every gauge, tested the radios, examined the fuel tanks that now brimmed with 100 gallons of highly refined aviation gasoline, just enough they hoped to reach the speck of land called Howland Island, 556 miles east, across a seemingly endless Pacific. Local officials and a handful of mechanics stood by, watching, some with concern, others in awe. Amelia slipped a flight map into her jacket, checked her altimeter again, and exchanged a steady glance with Noonan. They had discussed the perils unpredictable weather radio blackouts, the impossibly small target that was Howland Island, a mere 2 miles long and half a mile wide, surrounded by thousands of square miles of deep blue nothing. At 10 a.m. they took off. The Electra hurtled down the strip, rising quickly into the overcast sky, swallowed by clouds. Back in the United States, the crew of the Coast Guard cutter Itasca readied for their own part in the drama. Docked just offshore Howland, their radio operators hunched over crackling transmitters, ears straining for Earhart's signature calling Itasca. Supplies of gasoline, food, and medical equipment were ready just in case the Lady Lindy and her navigator made a rough landing. For the first several hours, radio contact was intermittent but reassuring. Amelia's voice came through in fragments. Position 4.33 south, 159.07 east. Weather cloudy overcast. Time passed. The sun climbed, beating down on dark water. It was approaching 7 a.m. Howland Island time. A tense excitement reigned aboard the Itasca. The men constantly adjusted their receivers. Soon they thought Amelia would appear over the horizon. Binoculars swept the skies and the sea. But the next message came with worry. At 7:42 a.m., Amelia's voice, it was tight, hurried, but audible, crackled over the airwaves. "We must be on you, but cannot see you. Gas is running low. Been unable to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet. Aboard the Itasca, the crew tried desperately to respond, sending signals, firing up the ship's generator to boost their transmissions. But nothing. No confirmation. No reply. At 8:43 a.m., a final desperate plea reached the airwaves, one that would haunt the team forever. "We are on the line 157,337. We'll repeat this message. We are running online north and south." For a few seconds, a silence so deep it felt preordained. Then the static returned. Baffled, the Itasca's radio men worked furiously, calling, pleading, transmitting on every frequency. But the cloud-strewn sky hid its secret. On land, news of the failed radio contact began to spread. At first, confusion. Did the Electra have mechanical trouble? Did she overshoot Howland? Surely she and Noonan would land on a friendly beach, perhaps a nearby islet. But as the hours thickened and the sky grew dark, certainty gave way to anxiety and then fear. The United States Navy scrambled ships, including the aircraft carrier USS Lexington and its fleet of planes. Newspapers across the planet shouted headlines, "Earhart missing in South Seas." Reporters hounded George Putnam, who clung to hope and marshaled resources for a search. To the world it seemed unthinkable that Amelia Earhart, strong, resourceful Amelia, could simply evaporate into thin air. In Leh, the people who had watched her soar into the clouds gathered on the empty runway, peered up at the sky, and wept. The greatest mystery in aviation history had begun. The response to Amelia's disappearance was immediate, frantic, and as the days wore on, heartbreakingly futile. Within hours, President Roosevelt greenlit the largest air and sea search in peacetime history. The USS Lexington, with 60 planes on board, and the USS Colorado, a battleship, were dispatched to the last known region of the Electra. The Itasca continued to comb the waters, trailing oil slicks and following phantom reports of floating wreckage. The Navy charted more than 250,000 square miles of ocean using both ships and airplanes. Pilots braved storms and treacherous currents. Their task: find even a scrap shredded metal, a lifer raft, a sign that the Electra had survived the impossible. Days became weeks. In Washington, George Putnam held daily press conferences. His faith never wavered, at least in public. He read aloud hopeful letters from fans who believed in Amelia's survival against all odds. He feverishly spent his own money hiring personal search crews and charting ships when the Navy's efforts faltered. On Howland Island, civilian radio enthusiasts claimed to pick up weak, garbled transmissions, Morse signals or voices believed to be Earhart's pleading for help. Some said they heard her say, "Tell my husband I love him." The authenticity of these post-disappearance messages remains bitterly debated to this day. Back in the States, newsreels played urgent messages. Volunteers and celebrities implored the public to stay hopeful. Even children wrote letters, their crayon-scrawled drawings offering prayers that Amelia would soon come home. Investigators pored over logs and radio transcripts. They traced the Electra's flight path, calculated wind speeds, consumption rates, and fuel reserves. Some believed Earhart and Noonan strayed north toward the Marshall Islands. Others thought an error had sent them too far south. Everyone searched the skies and seas, but every possible lead seemed to vanish. Frustration grew among the Navy and civilian searchers. On board the ships, morale dropped sharply. Each day yielded nothing but false hope. Reports of flotsam proved to be seaweed or whale bones. Isolated atolls scoured by searchers revealed only the tracks of birds and crabs. The investigation soon hit a wall. The vastness of the Pacific proved insurmountable, the ocean itself seemingly complicit in the disappearance. After more than 2 weeks, the Navy formally ended its search. Newspapers were somber headlines admitting defeat. Government gives up hope for missing aviatrix. George Putnam, refusing to let go, bankrupted himself in pursuit of private rescue missions. Listeners tuned in at midnight, still hoping to hear Amelia's voice carried over the airwaves across time and distance. But with every fruitless broadcast and every empty atoll, the world came to realize the bitter truth: Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan had left behind nothing more than the faintest echoes. Yet the void only invited speculation. Investigative reporters began to poke at inconsistencies in radio logs, cryptic Morse signals, and possible sightings. Was it possible that the greatest flyer of her era had simply disappeared without a trace? That impossibility haunted everyone who looked to the sky in hope. The theories began to multiply. The mystery only deepened. As the years passed, the search for answers intensified. The world would not accept that Amelia Earhart, one of the most capable navigators alive, could be swallowed whole without reason. Theories proliferated, some plausible, others fantastic. First came the Pacific crash theory. Most official records support this view out of fuel. The Electra ditched into the water near Howland. Fred Noonan, a skilled navigator, may have been slightly off due to cloud cover and unreliable radio contact. The ocean, after all, is vast and uncaring, but cracks appeared in this story. Why so many garbled radio messages after the Electra's official disappearance? Civilians from California to Hawaii claimed to hear calls for help, sometimes including details only Amelia would know. Soon other more sinister ideas took root. The spy theory. Some suggested that Earhart was not merely an aviator, but an agent. On the eve of global war, could Amelia have used her circumnavigation as cover to photograph Japanese military installations in the Pacific? According to this scenario, Earhart and Noonan may have been captured by Japanese forces after crashing in the Marshall Islands, then held as prisoners. Conflicting testimonies arose in support. Native islanders in the Marshalls reported years later of a white woman and white man detained by Japanese sailors. American GIs post-W. Dwight repeated stories they'd heard of a mysterious foreign woman held in Saipan who looked like Earhart. Still others claimed Japanese records referenced 2 flyers captured. Yet when pressed, no solid evidence emerged. The castaway theory. A new thread emerged when in the late 1940s, British colonial officers discovered human bones on Gardner Island, Nikumaroro, in modern Kiribati. The bones were measured. Some said they fit a woman of European descent. Tools, remnants of a woman's shoe, a sextant box, and fragments of an old campfire surfaced. Could Earhart and Noonan have landed on the reef endured for days or weeks, and finally perished so close to rescue? Forensic analyses of the bones argued both for and against the possibility, leaving no one satisfied. Conflicting tales arose even within these camps. Key witnesses changed their stories. Diaries were lost, and government files mysteriously went missing. At times, even George Putnam's trust was shaken by anonymous letters and unconfirmed rumors. Conspiracy theorists added to the daylight nightmare. Some believed Amelia staged her own disappearance seeking release from fame. Others insisted she returned to the U.S. under an assumed identity, living out her years as a housewife named Irene Bolam, a theory later dismissed, but which inspired tabloid headlines and heartache for the Bolam family. As years dragged into decades, the theories grew stranger. Fragments of aircraft found in the Pacific were claimed as Electra parts, only to be debunked in the lab. Murky photographs emerged, showing shadows and shapes that could have been the lost plane. Some researchers blamed navigation errors. Others implied sabotage or a suicidal despair masked behind Amelia's public resolve. No theory fully fit. Each conflicting account left behind a trail of doubt, and with each passing year, the prospect of closure faded into myth. But as the world obsessed over motives and culprits, one fact gnawed at the edge of every theory: there was no body, no wreckage, no proof, only shadows. The mystery of Earhart's fate became for many the ultimate unknowable. And in that vast vacuum, the world could not look away. Years became decades. The legend only deepened. Yet the story did not go cold. It continued to electrify. Each generation returned to the archives obsessed with the same haunting question: what really happened to Amelia Earhart? Then breakthroughs began to surface, each one stirring new waves of hope and controversy. In the 1980s, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, TIGAR, began systematic expeditions to Nikumaroro Gardner Island. Their finds were tantalizing: a woman's shoe from the 1930s, American-made scattered bones, a sextant box identical to the one Noonan would have used, and fragments of what could be an Electra engine cowling. TIGAR's exhaustive research suggested that the reef offered a flat landing strip, and tides would have gradually dragged the Electra into the sea, erasing most of the evidence. More telling were the anecdotes from local islanders: a story of a plane landing near the reef in the late 1930s, the discovery of a dead woman's body and a man's. Oral histories, fragmentary but stubborn matched details never released to the public. Forensic experts using modern statistical techniques revisited the bones measured decades earlier. Some now claimed there was a 99% likelihood they belonged to a tall, slender white woman, much like Earhart. But the bones themselves had vanished, lost for good leaving, only photographs and field notes. Critics pointed out flaws, and the debate raged anew. Decades-old classified files surfaced with typed reports and memos, suggesting U.S. officials suspected Japanese involvement, but suppressed the information to avoid diplomatic crises on the eve of war. The spy theory gained new traction in the 2000s, as Japanese military logs, mostly redacted, hinted at the interrogation of downed foreign pilots. Yet hard evidence was still out of reach. Then, in 2012, an underwater sonar search near Nikumaroro picked up a strange metallic anomaly. In the depths, a shape eerily consistent with the outline of an Electra's fuselage. Divers recovered tantalizing scraps, a fragment of plexiglass, a metal panel. Laboratory analysis suggested a high probability, but nothing conclusive enough to silence skeptics. In 2017, a re-evaluation of old radio logs from July 1937 uncovered compelling evidence that Amelia's distress calls had been received all across the South Pacific. Recordings once dismissed underwent digital analysis. Hidden in the static, researchers detected the matching voice prints of Earhart herself, confirming that someone had survived for days after the disappearance, broadcasting increasingly desperate calls for help. These revelations collided a possible landing on Nicomaroro, mysterious foreign transmissions and documents long kept hidden. For a brief moment, hope was rekindled, not just among scientists and historians, but for millions who yearned for closure. But the most shocking twist arrived in 2018. A team of archaeologists digging through the archives of the British colonial government in Fiji unearthed a trunk lost to bureaucracy. Inside were the original bone samples brought from Gardner Island in 1940. DNA analysis using samples from Earhart's living relatives provided astonishing results. The mitochondrial DNA was a close match. Amelia Earhart had almost certainly died as a castaway on that remote Pacific island, surviving for weeks against all odds. Yet the news did not bring the expected peace. New arguments erupted over chain of custody degraded DNA and conflicting reports. The scientific world hesitated, and skeptics smelled conspiracy. To this day, the final moments of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan remain a mosaic of tragedy and courage, riddled with gaps and half-truths. The world will never know exactly what thoughts filled Amelia's heart, or whether she glimpsed a rescue plane slicing the sky just before the end. But the evidence once scattered and overlooked had begun to realign. A soul who soared higher than any woman before had vanished, but in doing so, became infinite. And just as the world glimpsed the truth across the decades, the story twisted one last time. A researcher scanning newly digitized naval records stumbled upon a decrypted message sent from a khaki Q call sign, time-stamped days after the presumed loss. Coordinates. A line in the middle of blue darkness, far from any island. Was it Amelia's last desperate transmission? Or one final cosmic prank played by fate? The story concludes suspended, caught somewhere between lost and found, between history and legend. The line between reality and myth had dissolved, leaving behind the most enduring vanished story of the modern age. As we've retraced Amelia Earhart's final journey, the mosaic pieces of her last flight remain scattered across the endless Pacific. An aviator with the sky in her veins and history pressing at her back, Amelia vanished with her navigator Fred Noonan on July 2, 1937, when the world awaited her triumphant return to American shores. Radio signals faded into static, her Lockheed Electra dissolving into the mist between Ley and Howland Island coordinates. Forever blurred flight paths lost to churning waves. Despite the tireless search that ensued, the ships that combed the swelling tides, the frantic telegrams exchanged across continents, the hopeful eyes watching empty horizons, no conclusive trace of Amelia Fred or their craft was ever recovered. We follow vague trails, distress signals echoing on frequencies, now long, silent coconut crabs crawling across uninhabited atolls, weathered skeletons and shards of aluminum unearthed by storm and happenstance. But even these leads spiral into ambiguity, each theory dissolving into more questions than answers. Was it a navigational error in the world's last unmapped wild? Did engine failure carry her to the cold embrace of the sea? Or did she and Noonan survive just long enough to glimpse some uninhabited island to leave desperate signals on coral sand before becoming echoes in the wind? The records are maddeningly incomplete. The search maps are haunted by blank space. Even the radio transmissions those frantic pleas spun across empty air are nothing but ghosts now. There is something uniquely haunting in Amelia's story, a mystery that transcends any single explanation. Her disappearance is not just a failed journey. It shines a cold light on our deepest fears that those we love may vanish without a trace, that the world's silent spaces may swallow all our brilliance, ambition, and hope, without even a whisper in return. Even heroes, especially heroes, are sometimes lost to the indifferent margin, between known and unknown. The fragility of life is laid bare in the blue-green infinity of the Pacific. We like to believe we conquer nature, that charts and compasses and courage will prevail. But the ocean keeps its own counsel, its secrets held beneath a million unbroken waves. For every chain of evidence and every theory that promises resolution, there is always another shadow of doubt, another layer of silence. So much about Amelia Earhart's final hours will never be known. We can reconstruct her technical expertise, the pressure she faced, the lengthening shadows of dusk in the cockpit, the faint crackle of the radio, her voice suspended between hope and desperation. But then nothing. The world's first lady of flight, the symbol of modern independence, her fate slips quietly into legend. The disappearance of Earhart and Noonan asks us to confront the limits of our understanding. Across decades, searchers and dreamers have projected themselves onto her absence, reflecting our cultural anxieties and yearning for closure. Every possible ending: crash at sea, castaway, survival, captivity, and rescue, denied, exposes our helplessness before the world's secrets. Even today, technology that can gaze upon the surface of Mars cannot with certainty pull this lost flight from the depths. We mourn not only a woman or a pilot, but the very idea that history can ever be whole. The places where Amelia's story runs out are the places where our own imagination and fear begin. We are left to wonder if even the remarkable among us can disappear so completely. What hope is there for the stories that never made the front page, for the names never broadcast on radio? Amelia once famously said, "Adventure is worthwhile in itself." And perhaps it is. But the cost of such adventure, the risk of being consumed by the darkness at the world's edge, haunts us still. The Pacific is as wide as ever. The Electra's silver wings may one day be found, or they may rest forever beneath the restless foam, unknown and unremarked, but for the ache of unanswered questions. So we are left with the silence that followed her last words, the afterimage of courage fading into horizon's mist. Did Amelia's spirit find another shore beyond the reach of rescue or despair? Or does her voice still linger, a spectral distress call winding round the globe, searching for home? And as we stare out across the vast unmapped sea, let us ask, when history leaves its brightest souls unaccounted for, do they truly vanish? Or do their mysteries keep us searching, never allowing us or them to rest in peace?